Hey everyone! So I'm making a video today in honour of Earth Day, which is today. So happy Earth Day everyone. And I was thinking about what I could make a video about right now. And in England here we're kind of in for the full swing of spring. So there's a lot of pollen in the air, and I suffer from hay fever, as do many other people. So I thought I'd put together a quick video just exploring a few tips that have helped me with my hay fever and sharing them with you. And as usual, it's going to be a kind of combined approach of Western herbs with Ayurvedic approaches. So what is hay fever? Hay fever, it's also known as like seasonal allergies or allergic rhinitis. It's basically a series of symptoms, and everybody has their own kind of unique experience of it, but it comes about in reaction to pollen that is released from plants, flowering seed plants at this time of year, usually in spring. So it's the male kind of stamens on the flowers that you have pollen on them, which is this kind of powdery substance, and the plants that rely on wind dispersal for their pollination. So that's when the male pollen joins up with the female gamete and they produce new plants, seeds, whatever. Those are the ones that we are usually allergic to. So the wind-borne pollen. There's other ways that pollen gets dispersed, like by sticking to insects or animals and things like that. But usually it's, at least in England, tree and grass pollens. And those come about at different times of year. So you might experience hay fever symptoms earlier in the spring or later in the spring or in the middle of the summer, depending on specifically which pollens you're most sensitive to. But these tips are pretty much kind of one size fits all, so you can use them at any point of your hay fever throughout the year. So first of all, the symptoms of hay fever are kind of similar to those of a cold. So you have a runny nose, itchy eyes, sinus and mucus congestion, are more prone to getting sinus compression and pressure in the sinuses, and sneezing, congestion, but also fatigue. So a lot of people experience this, and that's why conventional pharmaceutical options for hay fever are really limiting, because they often make people feel really drowsy, and so on top of already feeling quite fatigued and run down as if you do have a cold, those drugs can kind of exacerbate that. So the natural way is perhaps better, or you can use in combination. That's a good thing to note. You can use all of these approaches in combination with medication if you need to take that if your symptoms are quite severe. So in terms of Ayurvedic understanding, there's for sure an aggravated kapha element, so this congestion, the excess mucus, that would signal a kind of aggravation of kapha in this particular disease. But also there's a pitta element because of the kind of itchiness and the redness and the inflammation, and I find for myself that I have quite sort of sensitive reddish skin sometimes when I'm out all day in the pollen. So it's about kind of cooling down that pitta, which is the fire element in Ayurveda, and also dissolving that mucus. And that's where the herbs come in and where these remedies come in, because they can do that really beautifully. So the first thing that I'm going to offer is an amazing, really old English traditional remedy, which is an infusion made out of nettle, elderflower and yarrow. So these are all herbs that you can find really, really easily in your, local parks, around natural areas. If you're lucky enough to live outside of a city, you can probably find these in a neighbouring field. So just, make sure that you know exactly what you're looking for, and then pick using the guidelines I like the ones on the Woodland Trust, but it's basically like, don't take too much, don't take things that are contaminated by either environmental pollutants or dog wee or things like that, just being sensible about it. And so you mix a tea out of equal parts of the dried herbs. So I've got some today that I collected yesterday, so that, as I mentioned earlier, they're like really, really easy herbs to find. So the elderflower is this one. So you've got just the flower heads, and what I'm going to do is just strip off the little tiny flower buds. The nettles that I have were already dry. I'm going to just crush those up a bit more, and these are the little baby yarrows. So you can see the leaves there that are kind of feathery, and that relates to their Latin name, Achillea millefolium, millefolium meaning 1,000 leaves. So that's quite a distinctive part of their appearance. And then here are some of the flowers. Don't know if you can see that very well, but they have these really distinctive sort of little bracts around the flower heads, and you can pick those out pretty easily. So all I'm doing there is I'm just gonna kind of mince it up quite finely with my fingers, wearing a marigold glove because the nettles can still sting you when they're dry. And then all you do is just pour boiling water over the top, wait for it to cool to room temperature, strain off the herbs and drink it. And you can make that kind of overnight if you like. You can make a sort of larger portion of it in a cafetiere or a French press, and leave that sort of boiling water over the herbs, leave it overnight, strain off in the morning, and then you could even put that into a kind of water bottle and drink it throughout the day, and that will really help with the symptoms. So just to go through those 3 herbs, elderflower has diaphoretic properties, so that means that it opens up the kind of pores of the skin, induces a little bit of a sweat, and seeing as hay fever is the operative word, so it's a kind of inflammation of the body. It helps the body to kind of release that through the sweat glands, through the pores. It's also expectorant, so that means that it helps to remove mucus and move mucus from the lungs and from the respiratory system in general. And finally, the anti-catarrhal action of elderflower is also what we're using it for in this instance, which means anti-catarrh, so anti-mucus again. So it's wonderful in all of those kind of colds, coughs, pulmonary infections, of which hay fever is very similar to. Then nettle, going through these quite quickly, but nettle is such an amazing plant and weed, and it's used for its amazing kind of strengthening quality. It has full of minerals, vitamin C, calcium, iron. It's got so much more than like even some of my friend was saying in her workshop the other day, than all of these sort of fancy algaes that you can get in health food stores now. Just get nettles from your local park. They've got everything that you can need and more. But in this instance, in the tea, what we're using the nettles for really is this anti-allergenic action that they have. So they're antihistamine, which if you have hay fever, you might notice, that is what a lot of the pharmaceutical drugs are doing. So they have the same action that nettle has naturally. In addition, I think the inclusion of nettle in this blend is also because of that sort of strengthening and stimulating property that it has, because as I mentioned earlier, of the element of fatigue in hay fever. So it's nutritive, it's anti-allergenic, it also is a slight sort of circulatory stimulant, general alterative tonic, and this strengthening quality. Juliette de Barraclay-Levy's is one of my favourite herbalists. She talks about the amazing ability of nettles to expel mucus from the body. So that's another way that that's useful in this instance. And finally, the third ingredient in the tea is yarrow, Achillea millefolium, which is an amazing plant and flower. It is used in many feverish conditions, such as hay fever, but also more kind of flu, colds, fevers, because of, again, this sort of febrifuge diaphoretic action. It helps the body to kind of move through those feverish states. And it's also an anti-inflammatory, so it kind of has this like lovely cooling action on the body, and an anti-septic, anti-bacterial. Sometimes I think when you have hay fever, it can lead to other things. So you're already suffering with all this congestion, and then wham, you get like a sinus infection. I think yarrow is really good for preventing that from happening. So that's the first suggestion, this lovely tea that you can make yourself. If you don't have access to, scrubland or parks or whatever where you can forage these things, then you can always order these herbs from your local health food shop, or I'm sure that they would just have them anyway. They're very common herbs. The second point that I wanted to make was about local honey. So local honey and local bees to the area where you live will have, digested those pollens that you are allergic to into delicious honey. So this is kind of another approach. It's more like a homeopathic approach, like you're giving yourself a small or inactive dose of the thing that is actually irritating your body in order to become more resilient to it or more used to it. So so that's basically it. The bees will do the job of digesting all those pollens into honey, and then you'll eat it, and I mean, it tastes really good too, so why not? But it's just basically like, if you eat honey anyway, then just choose a local honey, and that will, if you take that regularly for a few months before your hay fever comes on, then that should help with the symptoms as well. Also, honey itself is medicinal in the sense that it kind of soothes the back of the throat, it will dissolve some of that mucus, so it's like you can take it kind of ad hoc